Good afternoon, Connect Group leaders. We're so excited to be with you today and looking forward to a little bit of time in the book of Luke. I have my Explore the Bible Leader Guide right here for Luke 1 through 9, and you're going to get this this week. And we just are excited to welcome Dr. Van Nest here to do another overview with us on Luke 1 through 9. He's not a stranger to you guys, but Dr. Van Nest is Dean of the School of Theology and Missions at Union University. He's professor of biblical studies and teaches New Testament and teaches a lot of other stuff there as well. But we're grateful that he's willing to join us through this medium and excited to jump in with him. Dr. Van Nest has been just a great friend to us as a church and to the Tennessee Baptist Convention. He loves the church, and he's always gracious to work with us on this kind of thing. So we're grateful for you, Dr. Van Nest.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be with you.
Absolutely.
Dr. Van Ness, we are concluding right now our study of Isaiah, where we have just had wonderful passages of the prophecies of Christ, his birth, his life, obviously prophecies that show crucifixion, resurrection, all there. And so to go from Isaiah straight into Luke, where we are going to not just see the prophecies, but 700 years later, we see the reality and those prophecies coming true. It's going to be a great study for us. And we're actually going to be in Luke for 6 months. That is the longest period we have been in one book of the Bible for a long, long time. And so we're going to have a chance to dig deep and pretty much look at all of Luke, which is great. We'd like to start today with just you overviewing some of the main themes, some of those the big picture themes that we should be looking for, that we should expect in this study.
Yes, well, that's great that y'all have been doing Isaiah. You're going from what I believe, it's the second longest book in the Old Testament to one of the two longest books in the New Testament. So, that's fitting together. And one of my Old Testament colleagues just the other day, in a totally different context, said the best preparation for studying the New Testament is to study Isaiah. So y'all are prepared, you're ready. You will see some of those prophecies directly here in Luke. Luke makes a big deal, especially here at the first part of it, citing Old Testament texts, most often Isaiah. So we'll just share a few things about the book as you get into it and thinking about a few things. Not surprisingly, the author of the book of Luke is a guy named Luke, and you probably already know that he also writes Acts, and so those two together are the biggest chunk of the New Testament in terms of words or pages, and that's a big deal. But it's useful also to think a little bit about who this Luke guy is. He shows up with Paul. Colossians 4, Paul mentions him, calls him a doctor, and so that's just a little bit. He probably is getting some of his source from Paul, but he mentions there in the first part of the book how he is aware when he writes that many other people have already written gospels. So he's obviously not the first one. He's carrying on a dialogue with some other things that have already been written. So we get that sense of he's done some research. He's spoken to eyewitnesses, he says. So we have him as you could say, as a proper historian. He's done interviews. It seems to me, there's no way to know this for sure, but it seems to me that one of the people he's talked to is Mary, just with some of the things that he tells us. Obviously, the Lord could have revealed these things to him as well, but it seems to me that's one of the things. And then one thing you might not just notice going along, the Gospel of Luke has been noticed for the beauty of its writing through the years. In fact, let's see, here's the quote I'm looking for. One scholar a number of years ago called it the most beautiful book there is. And this was from a scholar who didn't always believe the Bible. So he was one who could be critical, but nonetheless, that was his point. So it is a striking book. It's going to be an exciting study for you. I will just mention another thing here at the front. When you first get in, he has this dedication to a guy named Theophilus. And we don't know who Theophilus was. But a dedication like this was a standard thing in the, if you will, the really nice literature of the first century. So this is probably somebody who is underwritten the project, given Luke a place to stay and help him. But it also sets this gospel up as a piece of refined literature from the time period. I did mention it's the longest book in the New Testament. Acts is the next one. So one of the fun things about Luke is it being longer, there's more stuff here than in the other ones. There's a lot of things in Luke that aren't anywhere else. 19 parables that are only here. When I'm doing a class, I'm able to ask questions. I ask students, what parables come first to your mind? And typically, those are ones from Luke. So Good Samaritan, Prodigal Son, two at the top. These are only in Luke, so you get to go through those. We'll look at the birth discussion here in a minute, but most of the stories we know about the birth of Jesus are here as well. The census, Mary's pregnancy, Elizabeth's pregnancy, the announcement about John the Baptist coming, the shepherds, the visit to the temple, all that is only in Luke. So it makes it particularly special. Luke also is the one who records for us hymns of praise. And the first few chapters, there's a bunch of them. So again, I tell students that it almost seems like this is an opera. One guy's definition of an opera was that somebody gets stabbed and then they sing. So at every turn, somebody starts singing. You have Mary's song, the Magnificat, and she finds out. When Elizabeth greets Mary, when she comes, Elizabeth's song, Ave Maria, sometimes referred to as. Zacharias' song, the angels, when they appear to the shepherds, and then Simeon when at the temple. So that's striking. That's not in it's not in any other New Testament books at all. So that's pretty neat. As far as themes, though, I'd say if you look things up, you can see this described various ways. But I think for each one of the Gospels, although this is just terribly obvious, the main theme is Jesus. They exist to tell us who Jesus is. And not just to tell us, but they aim to convince us that Jesus is the promised Messiah and that we should put our faith in him. John's gospel explicitly says that, but it's obvious in the other ones as well. So one of the things, especially when we get to chapters 4 to 9, that I want to do is just walk through with two main questions that I suggest to you are key themes. And that is, who is Jesus? Let's make it 3 just for the fun of it. Who is Jesus? What is he doing? And how are people responding? And all that's aimed to bring us to faith. So another way you could refer to a key theme in the gospel is salvation. Jesus comes for salvation. He comes to bring this. And then add on to that, not just salvation, but salvation for all people. Luke, even more so than the other Gospels, not in contradiction to the other Gospels, but even more so than the other Gospels, stresses that salvation is for all people, not just Jews. You will see this in certain things referred to as a universal impulse of the Gospel or a universalist idea in the Gospel, but that's tricky because typically when we hear universalism, people are referring to the idea that everybody's going to be saved. That's not the point here. But that the gospel should go to the whole world. That's what you see here in Luke. Last thing I'll mention is that Luke also, even more so than the other gospels do this, but he highlights how Jesus is reaching out to the people on the margins. Again, this is in the other gospels, but Luke will mention this in a story where others don't, or Luke will include another story about this. So this includes the poor. It includes the social outcasts, even shepherds who come. They are considered unclean, and women. I have made the mistake in class saying that Luke had a particular interest in women. Now, what I meant by that was that the gospel pays attention to their place in the ministry of Jesus. So it should be, again, real clear. So that's just a few things about the Gospel of Luke, some key themes and some key points.
These are super helpful, especially those 3 questions. And I know you're going to highlight that again with 4 through 9, but that's just really helpful almost for us to walk through with our leaders and with our classes saying, hey, hey, what are the 3 questions we're asking every week?
Yeah.
I think that's a really helpful teaching tool for us. So the first 6 weeks, there's almost a disproportionate time, which is exciting. It makes sense that we're in Luke 1 through 3, which is super encouraging because all through December and into January, we're walking through the Christmas story and the story of the birth of Christ up to John the Baptist. And so how should we think about that in particular as we walk through? Really getting to spend a lot of time in those passages. How does Luke frame the story of Christ's birth and upbringing?
Yeah. I really feel like in a number of ways that a Bible teacher shouldn't have a favorite part of the Bible, right? It's all great. But Luke 1 and 2 are some of my favorites. I could just sit here for a long, long time. There's just so much fun in it and so much beauty, what's happening. So one of the things in 1 to 3 is that you have 2 stories, and they are parallel, but they're interwoven. So you got John the Baptist and you've got Jesus. And growing up from my earliest days, I was taught, the Bible's the Word of God, and it's true, and I believed that and read it. But what I didn't understand until a little bit later was that's true, and it is literature. So Luke is doing something here. It's not just, he had some kind of contract with John the Baptist family, so he had to give him enough airtime. But he's doing something by putting these side by side. And mainly, what that's doing is it's serving his agenda of pointing out that Jesus is the promised Messiah. But it's fun to notice this back and forth. So it opens after his dedication to Theophilus. It opens with John the Baptist and the announcement to Zechariah that he's going to have a son. So we kind of, if we didn't know the Gospel of Luke, we kind of think, okay, tell me about Jesus, and all of a sudden we're this John guy. So we have a supernatural announcement, and then we shift scenes, as it were, and then we've got a supernatural announcement to Mary. And then our stories converge because Mary goes to see Elizabeth. And we have the Magnificat and all the things going there. Then we go back to John the Baptist and the response. You got Zechariah's song. Then we move to the birth of Jesus, which is a little longer. And that's all of chapter 2. But chapter 3 is back to John the Baptist. So John the Baptist is born first. That's just chronologically true, but it's in the gospel. He's mentioned first about he's going to be born, and then Jesus. He actually is born, and then Jesus. But then John starts his ministry, and then Jesus. And all of this is coming together, and Luke keeps pointing to the Old Testament to say, look, as if he's excited. He's like, hey guys, check this out. You know the Old Testament said this, and y'all are watching for this fulfillment, and lo and behold, look, here is this Elijah who was supposed to come. And here is the one he's going to talk about. And of course, when we get to chapter 3, and John starts his ministry, the culmination of John's ministry is to finally point out Jesus. And then John basically is done in the narrative. There'll be reference to his death, but those first 3 chapters, that's what he's there for. The stories are interwoven in order to point out, notice who this Jesus is. So that's kind of big picture of what's there. But I'd like to take a minute and just dive into a few things of what's in this text. When you go back to the announcement to Zechariah, right? So we probably have some basic familiarity here, and so we know he's a priest. He's in the temple. This is his turn to go in and do the sacrifice. And from what we know from the time period, there were a lot of priests, and so you were on a rota as to when you would do this. And this might have, for Zechariah, been a once-in-a-lifetime thing. We don't know that for sure. It wouldn't have been common, at least, or it wouldn't have happened a lot. So there he is. One way or another, this got to be a big deal, right? You're a priest. This is what you train for. Here's your chance. And you're going to go do this thing. You don't want to mess it up and all that. And he's in there, and an angel shows up. Now, for church people, so Christians, people who've been in church for a while, been around the Bible, that's a blessing, but we can take some things for granted. We've read the Bible enough Old, New Testament, we've read these texts enough that we might get the idea angels came and talked to people all the time. They're kind of a sense of the people in the first century world. Oh, here's another angel. There he is. Great. But that is not the case. That's not what went on. So when Zechariah is here in the temple and this angel shows up, this would have been freaky. It says fear fell upon him. Of course. For one thing, some of you probably experienced, you're in a room at your house or wherever, and nobody's there, and you know nobody's there, and you're going along and you turn around and somebody is there. That's freaky. Well, he has that, plus this is an angel. And every time angels show up to people, they in the Bible, they freak people out. So there's an awesomeness about their presence, which is kind of weird about common language we use. Some guy says of a girl, you're an angel, or you look like an angel. I always tell college students that the gal should say, oh, so I scare you to death and make you pass out. Because that's what happens. But this is a scary thing, and he doesn't know what's on. And then he gets told, hey, this is what's going to happen. Well, we know that he doesn't believe right away, so he gets judged for that. There's a point here about believing God. But this mention that John the Baptist is not to drink wine or strong drink, we may not, what's going on there? This is almost certainly a reference to the Nazirite vow in the Old Testament, which typically was for a period of time. You would take a special vow, and during that time, you would abstain from these things and not cut your hair as well. And then when the vow was over, you would go back. But Samson is one who is a Nazirite from birth throughout his life, and it seems Samuel. And so I think that's what's being referred to here. So again, with people who know the Old Testament, we've got a notice this is a special birth, like Samson, like Samuel, like some others in the Old Testament. So this is a highlighted person. And then this vow here is going to highlight him even more. There's something very special about this child who's going to be born. And he tells him he's going to be the Elijah. This is a reference to Malachi. He's going to be the one who prepares the way of the Lord. I told you I love these. I could stay here too long, but we do know the name of this angel. He's Gabriel, one of only two angels mentioned in the Old Testament. And Daniel, Gabriel, is the one that comes to explain to him a vision about end times and things. So, and he comes with a swift flight. But I like this text. His name's not mentioned. When he just shows up, he's got a message to give. So he just gives it. But it's when Zechariah says, are you for real? That the answer is, I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God. In other words, what are you doing doubting me, boy? I showed up here to tell you this. So he's going to be mute until the right time. So that's the foretelling of John the Baptist. Then when the scene shifts, we're told directly then Gabriel's the angel on the next mission, and he goes to a city of Galilee named Nazareth. Again, as people familiar with the biblical text, we kind of know that's what's coming. We might miss the connotation that would have been clear in the first century world. Luke is self-consciously writing the Jews and Gentiles, it seems. Jewish people, well, probably Gentiles, Greek speakers, they wouldn't know where this is anyway. It's, somebody tells you a story about some place and you don't know where it is because it was an insignificant place. But Jewish people would probably be surprised. You may remember from the Gospel of John when one of the disciples says, can anything good come out of Nazareth? So this is not a highly favored place. This is the wrong side of the tracks. So when Gabriel goes to a city of Galilee named Nazareth, people would be scratching their heads. What? We know Messiah. He should be born in Bethlehem. That's on the far south end of the country. Nazareth is on the far north end of the country. So we're not even in the right place. The Samaritans are even between here. It's a long way away. Something's going wrong. And one of the things I love most, be careful about saying most because everything ends up most, but in the Christmas story is we see God at work accomplishing rescue, accomplishing salvation in the midst of darkness. I think, I know I've watched my own heart as I've served and watched others. we tend to think if something good's coming, then everything's looking right. If God's about to take care of me, if God's about to rescue me, if God's about to do something big in my life, then I'll hear the soundtrack and it's obvious and it's coming. But one of the things we see in the Christmas story is that God is at work in the dark. God very often is at his deepest work in the darkest times. So when he goes to Nazareth, this is almost one of the worst possible places you could go. In Isaiah, you saw the text. Well, I don't know if you hit all of it. So you may have seen the text when it refers to Galilee of the Gentiles. And Gentiles is almost a curse word. It's where those people live. But he's going to go there. And from there, he's going to bring the rescuer. So he goes, it says, to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph, and he's in the house of David. Boom. All right, we're hearing this. We've got a David line. But then this story is also one of my favorites. I don't know if we think about it realistically enough. Angel shows up to Mary. A girl named Mary in Nazareth should expect angels to show up. He says, hey, you're going to have a baby. She says, oh, cool. That's nice. What will he be? He'll be the Messiah. That's wonderful. I would love to do that. Thank you. Of course not. This is Mary. She's probably mid to early teenage years. She's doing some work on her own. Nobody else is mentioned. It seems that she's alone. So put yourself in that situation. You're in a small town. Some of you are from small towns. You know how this works. In small town, everybody knows everybody. So you're in a small town. You're doing your stuff. And lo and behold, some unknown dude shows up. And it's just you and him. And he says, greetings, O favored one. The Lord is with you. That's weird. Some things have changed in culture. Some things stay the same. But, I mean, that's got to sound like this is a really creepy pickup line or something. Because she's never seen this guy before within a small town. And it says, she was greatly troubled at the saying. Exactly. She tries to discern what kind of greeting this might be. What kind of greeting? Not what do those words mean, but what are you after? What is this? So this is freaky, scary. And what's the next thing he's going to say to her? You're going to get pregnant. This is only getting weirder. But he tells her she will bear a son, and he will be called the Son of the Most High. Now, we find out from Mary's song, she knows the Old Testament. She knows what he's saying now. The Lord God will give to him the throne of his father David. He'll reign over the house of Jacob forever and ever. She gets it. Boom. You're going to be mother to the Messiah. Now, again, we know that the Jews have been talking about Messiah. They've been looking for the Messiah. They had ways to, every year at the Passover, to think about the Messiah coming. We know that. So if we know that, I wonder what little Jewish girls in the first century and the century before that did. I know that young girls across cultures and across time sit around and talk about when they're going to get married. Little boys don't do that. But little girls do, what that might be like. So I just wonder if little Jewish girls didn't sit around and say, maybe I'll be mother to Messiah. Who will be the mother of the Messiah? Well, not Sally. We know it wouldn't be her or whatever. So here's Mary all of a sudden. She gets this incredible news. Probably something that is aspired to by Jewish young ladies. And one of the things that I like particularly about Mary here is how level-headed she is. She doesn't go all, whatever. But she's very level-headed. She asks a very sensible question. And it's not a doubting question. It's just, she basically takes it all in and says, okay, I just got a question. How's this going to happen? Because I'm a virgin. Now, we've been told that she's engaged to Joseph. So it seems to me that what she's saying is, okay, sir, thank you. I realize this is a message from God. Do I need to tell Joseph? Do we need to move up the wedding date? It's very sensible. And we know that's not a doubting question because Zacharias, just before this, doubted, and the angel said, you're going to be punished for it. He doesn't rebuke Mary at all. He just says, I will answer your question. So, great question. And there's, of course, the miraculous part. The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the child to be born will be called Holy, the Son of God. Wow. I can't explain to you how all that works. and nobody in the history of the church can, and all how it all goes. We know this is a miraculous thing, and Mary is the true mother, but there is not a human father, and the Messiah is there. But what does Mary understand? Well, we need to think about this a little bit to realize she has no idea. What does it mean? Does this hurt? What's this like? She does realize, I'm going to be pregnant now, and I'm not yet married. That's not such a big deal in our culture today, but it was a big deal in the first century. A woman in Mary's situation could be dragged out and stoned. Now, somebody might say, but the Jews weren't allowed to do capital punishment in those days. The Romans had to do it. And legally, you are correct. But things don't always happen legally. When Paul is involved, Saul at the time, he's involved in the stoning of Stephen. They drug him out, stoned him. They wanted Jesus to endorse the stoning of an adulterous woman. So when Mary hears this, we need to reckon with it. She's just been told, God has called you to a task. This task puts your life in danger. This task also puts in danger everything you've ever aspired to. Because what's Joseph going to say? She didn't ask that question. She doesn't get any guarantee. She's just told, hey, this is what God wants you to do. What's it going to be like to tell Joseph what's going on? Hey, Joseph, I'm pregnant, but let me explain. So this marriage that's anticipated, it's at risk. What's she going to say to her parents? And this day, what would be typical would be for you to be put out and have no support, no nothing. So when the angel says this to her, it is neat and cool, and we sing about it, and that's great, but we got to understand this is a powerful picture of discipleship. God has just called Mary to a very important task, and this task could cost her everything. She doesn't say, oh, wait, could you give me a guarantee? She doesn't say, will you promise me this or that? All she says is in verse 38, behold, I am the servant or the handmaiden of the Lord. Let it be done to me according to your word. That's powerful. That's supposed to be our take when the Lord calls us to whatever it is he calls us to say, you're God. I'm here to serve you. Whatever you say, let's do it. And this is why it is proper to honor her in this sense as a example of discipleship. So that's a favorite text of mine. Many other things we could talk about there, and even with the birth of John the Baptist. But time is a little tight, so let me just say something about the birth in chapter 2. There are only 2 texts about the birth of Jesus, the narrative anyway, the story of it. And that's Matthew 1 and 2 and Luke 1 and 2. So I know of a guy who said he wanted to read the Christmas story to his family, and somebody suggested Matthew or Luke, and he said, nah, we do those all the time. I want to read a different one. Just don't let that be you, because that's the only 2 places they are. But Luke here, he roots this in history. He tells us when this goes on. When you get to 2:1, he tells us who the emperor is. He tells us who the governor is. And this census comes. Again, we've probably heard this text a lot, but you need to think a little bit about a census. The reason governments do census is for taxes or for, in certain instances, draft, military, this kind of thing. So when you are governed by a foreign authority, a census is not a good thing. So this comes from a pagan emperor that says, hey, guess what? You get to interrupt whatever you're doing, and you got to go to the right place, and you got to get signed up. And probably this is because I'm going to make you pay more money. They're already oppressed. So I would imagine when word comes about this census to Galilee, that there is groaning and complaining. There probably would have been protests, except they would have been beaten down. I wonder about faithful families, because not all were. But I wonder if some of them are saying, where is God? I thought the Messiah was going to come. This is supposed to be the Lord's land, and yet we have these pagans walking around it, and they have carved images on on their shields and everything else. And this is defiling the land. And we're supposed to have a son of David to reign. And what do we have? All we have is more oppression. But this is one of the beautiful things again. This census, which would have certainly listened or been heard by them as more evidence of oppression, this census is actually God at work bringing salvation. Oftentimes, the scary, painful, harmful things that come into our life are actually preparation for God bringing deliverance. Because the problem in the story is, okay, we've been told Messiah is going to be born, and his mom and his adopted dad live in Nazareth. If we were watching this play out in a movie, we'd be stomping our foot away. We're going, oh no, Messiah's about to be born in the wrong place. The whole Bible's going to fall apart. What's going to happen? Will somebody please tell them to take a trip to Bethlehem? Well, somebody did. The pagan emperor. The pagan emperor who does what he jolly well pleases and lives hundreds of miles away for some reason, which is a shorthand for God's sovereignty, he decided, let's have a census. And he signed the decree, and it went on boat and everything else, and happened to get there at the right time for them to get it, for them to go to Bethlehem, for Messiah to be born at the right place. God is governing history, and he's causing all things to work together for the good of his people. So they go, and of course, that must have been a tough trip. We have 6 kids, and so when you're close to a child being born, people often kid about wanting the baby to come on. And I've heard stories like you probably have about a pregnant lady going for a ride in an old truck over bumpy roads to induce labor and all these kind of things. We never tried that, but I've just always heard about that. I wonder what a donkey trip across most of the land of Israel was like. Wouldn't have been fun. But while they're there, she gives birth. And you know the story there. They're not in an inn. We could go into, there'll probably be some good detail of that in your book. But big picture here, we have to think of Messiah shows up. He's not in Jerusalem. He's not in the big city. He's in Bethlehem, which was prophesied. But even there, he's not in the normal place of human habitation. He is on the outside. So Luke, who's going to point out at various times how Jesus is interested in those on the margins, he's the one that tells us Jesus is born on the margins. He's born on the outside. And the shepherds who are ritually unclean because they're dealing with sheep, they are the first ones to hear about it. They're the first witnesses. They're ritually unclean, and yet they come to the Messiah. And the Messiah is here for all people. That's part of what the angels tell them. They bring great news, which will be for all the people. Not just Jews, but all people. And again, we shouldn't think that, what are shepherds? Shepherds in Israel are people who keep sheep and listen to angel songs. No. When this angel shows up, it scares him too. Scares them, I should say. It's one, and then there's a whole multitude. And they go and they obey, first of all. They go to do what they're told, and they find, just like they were told, Mary, Joseph, and the baby. And they rejoice. They tell other people so amazing things there. Well, I probably should stop there. I'll just say that the story of Jesus at 12 years old in the temple is another great one. It's just a fun story. If any of you parents have ever left kids, my 4th son, we've left at church 3 times, I think. Never left any of the other ones. I'm not sure what that says, but you can see that human drama, but you see Jesus knows who he is. That's the thing. Because remember our question, who is he? This is showing us he knows who he is already. And they begin to get it as he moves along. So I'll stop there, see if there's any other questions.
Well, after the first of the year, we switch obviously from the Christmas narrative to the life of Christ, the teachings, temptations. We'll be studying chapters 4 through 9 during January and February. What are some of the things we ought to be looking for there as we prepare to teach those lessons?
Yeah. Well, I do think here, especially in those first few chapters, we've got these key stories, so I focus on them. But then we settle into the regular rhythm of the gospel. which is really kind of short account after short account, little story after little story, interspersed with teaching sections as we go along. And I think the most helpful way to go about across the whole thing is asking those key questions. What is Jesus doing? How are the people responding? How is he identified? I think I said it a little differently that time, but those same three questions. So let's just do that just a little bit here ourselves. And for the sake of it, I'm going to reach back to chapter 3. And I'll just say at the beginning of chapter 3, the first 2 verses is probably stuff that first verse and a half or so, we probably tend to skip over because it's in the day of this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. That's really striking. We see Luke here doing history again. He's being very particular about when this happens. But he's introducing John the Baptist, and he's also sounding a whole lot like the Old Testament histories when they introduce prophets. Many of the prophets start with, in the however many year of King so-and-so, the word of the Lord came to. Many of the writing prophets, that's the first verse. For Isaiah that you just finished, it's in the 6th chapter. And the year that King Uzziah died, the word of the Lord came. So that's exactly what John's doing. I'm sorry, John the Baptist. Luke is saying about John. So part of what Luke is telling us is this is an Old Testament prophet, or this is a prophet in that mode, if you will, like one of those. So we find him, and he's introducing, and it closes with, he tells us, I'm not the Messiah. They think he is. But one is coming, and it closes then with Jesus before the genealogy. And we have the Holy Spirit coming upon him and the voice from heaven, you are my beloved son. So this setting up, this is who he is. Who is, how is he identified? The genealogy works into how he's identified as well, showing that he's son of David, son of Adam. Matthew takes it only back to David. He's making the point he's the Jewish Messiah. Luke taking it all the way back to Adam, maybe doing a few things, but at least one of them, he's getting back to, again, all of humanity. Everybody descended from Adam. Jesus is for them. And Jesus then about to launch his public ministry, but first we have the temptation. And so when we come through the temptation, what do we have? We see Jesus dealing with that. Jesus is the one who defeats Satan. That's a big deal. Where does this take place? It takes place in the wilderness, 40 days. We're supposed to catch some Old Testament echoes. 40-something in the wilderness, 40 years in the wilderness. The wilderness is the place of temptation. This is where Israel failed. Israel's in the wilderness for 40 years because they did not obey. Jesus as the new Israel, Jesus as the one who's coming to fulfill where Israel failed. Jesus is the servant of the Lord. You've just finished Isaiah. Servant of the Lord there first means, in Isaiah, first means Israel. They fail, so here's a new servant of the Lord to accomplish it. This is what Jesus is doing. So he defeats the devil. He succeeds where Israel failed. And then when we finish the temptation, it tells us that he comes in the power of the Spirit. So Jesus is somebody who works in the power of the Spirit. And then this message, the word about him goes out to all around country. And he's teaching, so that's what he's doing. And he's being glorified by all. That's how our people are responding. He's a big deal. The stories that follow are basically Jesus heals or Jesus teaches. One of those two. Jesus is doing works of power. Jesus is teaching in power. And in both of them, people are amazed. We'll try to kind of just dip down. But I encourage you as you go through each little snippet, each little story, look for how do the people respond. What I just mentioned in 4:14 is he was being glorified by all. When you come to 4:31, when he's going to heal another man there, it says that people were astonished at his teaching because his word possessed authority. Again and again, you're going to have these things. People are astonished. People are amazed. So how are they responding? Now, you're also going to have, they're astonished, they're amazed. Some are going to like what he's doing, and some are going to hate what he's doing. That's not accidental as well. Luke is telling us what happened, but also as we encounter the teaching of Jesus, we've got to ask the question, are we going to be among those who submit to what he says, receive it, or are we going to be those who oppose what he says and reject it? Now, I want to go on to the way he's identified, but just with that idea that I think is a key thing for each little section, going through those 3 months, I guess it is in this quarter, what are we going to do with Jesus? How did the crowds respond? How does that tell us how we're going to respond? And to set with that one for a minute, I want to look at Jesus's time in Nazareth in Luke 4:16-30. Because he comes to Nazareth. It says, as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, which is just a great little verse. Jesus' custom, Jesus' habit was to go to the synagogue on the Sabbath day. The correlation to that now, post-resurrection, is it being our custom, our habit, to gather with the church on the Lord's day. So he does, and he stands up to read, which was the typical. So they give him the scroll of the prophet Isaiah, there we're referring to, and he reads and he sits down. This would be the typical. You stand for the Jewish synagogue, you stand to read the scriptures, you sit down to teach. And he reads this great text about the anointed one coming and bringing deliverance. And when he sits down and they all look at him, he says, today the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. Man, there are a bunch of places in the Bible where I wish I had video, but this is one of them. Boom. It's happened right here, right now. And we talked about people's response. Well, all spoke well of him and marveled at the gracious words that were coming from his mouth. So, first of all, in his teaching, they said, this is great. He's amazing. He's a great teacher. Then they begin to wonder a little bit. Wait a minute, this is his hometown. Hey, we know Joseph. This is Joseph's boy, right? And they wonder about it, and Jesus is where he tells them that a prophet isn't accepted in his own hometown. And he points out how this has happened in the Old Testament. What he does is they liked Jesus when he was saying cool things. They went, man, that's great. I haven't heard that before. I haven't seen that. That's great insight. Thanks for helping me out. I hadn't understood that before. But then Jesus went to application. And when he stepped on their toes, they didn't like that. So when you get to verse 29, well, let's go back to verse 28. When they heard these things, all in the synagogue were filled with wrath. And they rose up and drove him out of the town and brought him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built so that they could throw him down the cliff. It is very interesting to look at verses 28 and 29 and then back to verse 22. At verse 22, cool, man, he talks great. Verse 28 and 29, we're going to kill you. Here's a real sober word on this. I've got it written in the margin of my Bible. It's very easy for church people to hate Jesus. We need to sit with that. I'm talking about me, I'm talking about us. Because what's going on is they like the idea of Messiah coming, but they had their own idea about what Messiah ought to do. And when Messiah showed up and said, I'm the one calling the shots here, and it's going to go this way, they didn't like it very much. We all have a tendency to make God in our image instead of the other way around, and to expect God to follow our plans and to do things our way, and that is very dangerous. Because God has a way, straightway through Bible and history, to color outside of my lines and your lines. Put it another way, he has a tendency to act like he's God. And so we need to reconcile ourselves to that. It's very easy in our current setting, for the last many decades, to roll along in a cultural Christianity that sees Jesus as a nice add-on. But that's always been false. Somewhere along the way, that's going to crash. Jesus shows up to bring salvation, but Jesus didn't show up to do our bidding. He shows up and he calls us to submit to him. And if we will find life in that. But we may not find what we thought we wanted. But there is a way that seems right to a man, and in the end, it leads to death. That statement comes up twice in Proverbs. So we need to submit our hopes, our dreams, our plans, our ideas to God. And when he takes them and throws them away, he's just calling us to trust him that what he's going to do is going to be even better. So that's a challenge. And that text right here just brings that up. And then as we go through, you're going to keep seeing, hey, we like what Jesus is doing. We're going to follow him. And whoa, we hate what he's doing. Back and forth. And those show up at the end of almost every story. And I think they're sitting there for two reasons. One, historically it happened, but also it's sitting there to say, so which is it? What are we going to do? It's not enough just to say, hey, he's a cool teacher. I like when he talks. The question is, are we going to submit to him? And that ties into that other question, who is this man? If he is a mere human teacher, then sure, that's great. Listen to him. But if he is what all these texts keep pointing to, he's the promised Messiah, he's Son of God, he's going to reign on his Father's throne over the house of David, over the whole world, then that means we've got to submit to him. And I say you have got to, that's true, but we get to. This is where life is found. So as you go through, that's one of the things. How are people responding and how should I respond? But also, how is Jesus identified or who is Jesus? The people kind of get it, but the group that really understands who Jesus is early on are the demons. So that next story, when he goes to Capernaum, the people are astonished at his teaching again, but there's a guy in the synagogue with a demon. Now, we can sit on that for just a minute. I visited that synagogue twice, or actually it's a little bit later synagogue built on top of this one. But just to ponder, here in the gathered community, what today for us would be church, there's somebody with a demon. But he says, I know who you are, the Holy One of God. Jesus rebukes him. Later on in the same chapter, verse 41, demons are coming out of people and they're crying out, you are the Son of God. And he rebukes them again because they knew that he was the Christ. They're aware of what's up. There's spiritual conflict going on. It's we who tend to be slow. Jesus is rebuking them. He doesn't need the testimony of the demons, but we're able to see, hey, this is who this man is, and the whole rest of the story is going that way. Even as you get to the end of this section at chapter 9, that's probably the reason this is closed there. That is a key climax where you have Peter confessing that Jesus is the Christ. So that's kind of just that storyline of that arc there. The disciples don't quite get it. When Jesus does some amazing miracles, they wonder who he is. They begin to get some sense. You get that they understand he's not just a typical person. But then that culminates in chapter 9 with Peter's confession. And that's supposed to bring us to that confession to say, yes, I will also believe this truth that Peter has uttered. Even though Peter, he doesn't understand it in its fullness yet. He will post-resurrection. But that's the confession that we are all called to. Let me just hit and then see if there's another question. Just that, look in each of these little sections. Look for what does Jesus do? He's every time he's either teaching or healing. And then how do the people respond? You might even just mark these in different colored ink or something. I find that kind of interesting, just tracking that through. But astonishment, all that's typical. And then sometimes direct faith or direct opposition. And then how is Jesus identified? Who is he? Because that is the overarching theme of the whole deal. Who is Jesus? And it's stated at that confession in chapter 9, and then it's proven there at the end of the resurrection.
So, Dr. Van Nest, would you say that one of the big ways, I guess, is kind of to trace the development of the picture of Jesus? That's a big thing to kind of hone in on with our class. That's kind of, or with our groups as we're teaching through this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it could be even fun. I don't know exactly how the lesson is going to break things up, but even to kind of keep track of from week to week. Up to this point, what do we have about who it says Jesus is? And what's added to that this time? Up to this point, what do we see about how people are responding to Jesus? Because some of the same words are used, but then sometimes some different things. And what's new here about what Jesus is doing? Are we in preaching here or healing? And how is this tweaked or developed?
For sure. Go ahead, Jerry. Hold on one second.
I am muted. Sorry about that. I was just going to say that's a great way to prepare the lessons as well, by using those 3 questions and finding that, and that leads us to most of our 9 lessons. I mean, they have titles such as anticipated, matured, rejected, followed, reigned, loved, unashamed, and so I think those 3 questions are going to lead us to the main point based on the titles of our lessons there. Make it easier to prepare for as well.
Good.
Well, we appreciate your help. We will be back with you soon, hopefully in person. But if not, we'll do this again by Zoom. And thank you so much for helping us get ready for another great quarter of Bible study. And if there's anything we can do to help you, let us know. We'd love to.
Well, thank you very much. I always enjoy it.
Thanks a lot.